For my second semester at university, I read quite a few books, but there are some books that I want to talk about, but I don't necessarily want to make like a kind of independent review for them. So I'm going to quickly go through them and just kind of tell you what I thought of them. Miss Julie by August Strindberg. I actually did my essay on this to gender writing. This play is incredibly misogynistic. Yeah. That doesn't necessarily make it a bad play. It's not a bad play. I just think it's extremely problematic with how it looks at gender. Miss Julie is a naturalistic play, and for me that is kind of problematic because there are lots of things that are kind of associated with women in this novel which, as contemporary audiences, we now see as not being natural, but Strindberg views women as just being these crazy, hysterical and weak characters because that's how they naturally are. That's just like how they were made biologically, and it's just kind of weird and just misogynistic. There are lots of powerful scenes in this book. Like the scene with the greenfinch, I think it is just fantastic. It's incredibly passionate and powerful. The portrayal of class in this novel is also really intriguing, and in fact, it would have been really interesting to actually do a Marxist analysis of this text. You don't have to agree with every text you read, you don't have to like every text you read, but it's interesting to apply theory and to annotate it and to get all excited. But yeah, me and Strindberg really don't get on. A book from contemporary writing, Then We Came to the End by Joshua Ferris. I did an essay on this book too, talking about corporate culture and masculinity, two of my favourite things to write about. I love writing about masculinity and capitalism. I swear, if I don't mention like a phallic symbol or kind of patriarchy in an essay or sex in general, there is something massively wrong. This book is supposed to be funny, but I think because I was reading it for university and I was annotating it and I was reading it in a completely different way than, in which kind of Ferris actually intended people to read it. I really liked the narrative style of this novel because he uses we, so it's almost like there's a group of narrators, and it was just a fantastic metaphor for like corporate culture and kind of the group mentality that's kind of in this ad agency. In Then We Came to the End. It is incredibly good. I loved studying this book actually. I loved annotating it. And there was so much good stuff in here. I didn't find it funny, but I would really recommend it to anybody who has ever worked in an office, because there is so much I think that you'll recognise, and if you like the Office TV shows, pick this book up. Grace Nichols, The Fat Black Woman's Poems. I honestly can't say too much about this except it's beautiful and I love Grace Nichols, and we did work on looking at the female body, and in particular the black female body, and looking at how it's almost eroticised and how it's objectified, and it was just fascinating. I applied all the kind of things that I'd learned from studying Grace Nichols to On Black Sister Street by Chika Unigwe, and I really enjoyed reading this book, and I studied this book looking at desire and sexuality and really looking at how neoliberalism, slash capitalism has basically led to the exploitation of people, and in particular women. It is for women who are trafficked from Nigeria to the Brussels red light district. This book was a really nice read. I actually really did enjoy reading it. It is incredibly brutal at some points. That made it even more impactful, and it really was something that just kind of hit you when you're reading it, and I just think it's a great book to read, especially if you're maybe interested in prostitution. I like reading narratives like that, so it was really, really good. Zeitoun by Dave Eggers. I have never read anything by Dave Eggers before, and I know he's super, super popular. And I've also never read a book like this because it's a piece of literary non-fiction, and that was really beautiful. The beginning of this novel was just a joy to read. Zeitoun focuses on Hurricane Katrina, and the lead up to Hurricane Katrina in this novel is beautiful, and I know it sounds really horrible to say that, but It just opened my eyes to an event that I honestly didn't know a lot about, and it made me question so many things, in particular about the government's involvement in Hurricane Katrina, in the aftermath, I should say, of Hurricane Katrina. I was also really intrigued by the portrayal of what it's like to be a Muslim in America, especially after 9/11. Because Zeitoun himself and his wife, Kathy, are Muslims. I love the fact that Eggers actually went into what it meant to them to be Muslim and what kind of effect that had on their lives and how important it was to them. My favourite part of this novel was actually some of the bits that had Kathy, and Kathy was actually a convert to Islam, and I just found it incredibly moving. The way she talked about her religion and why it was important for her to convert. And I think if you're interested in American literature and in contemporary literature, this is a one to pick up. But it's just a really interesting portrayal of not only a horrific natural disaster, and it looks at kind of what it means to be human and what's important to us. So it was a good book. Passing by Nellie Larson. I have never read a book that was kind of in the genre of passing. Passing is a genre, fully said that, when somebody passes for something that they're not. I know that sounds pretty obvious, and it is pretty obvious, but it was a completely new thing for me to discover and explore, and one of my lecturer people is really into passing novels, and it was really great to hear her talk about this novel in particular. It's focused on two women who are both African American, but who could pass for being white. One thing I actually enjoyed with this novel was not only just how kind of beautifully written it is, it was the discussions we had in class. We discussed whether the N-word could ever be reclaimed, and we looked at a poem by Dean Atta. I'm actually going to have to say the N-word, by the way, so warning. The poem by Dean Atta is called I'm Nobody's Nigger, and he talks about why he doesn't think the N-word should be reclaimed, or why he doesn't think it can be completely reclaimed. And that poem was mind-blowing, and it just opened my eyes to so much. It's actually set in the 1920s, and that was just kind of wonderful, because the only books I'd ever read that were set in the 1920s were like The Great Gatsby. It just reinforces the racism that was evident in the 1920s and is still incredibly relevant today. If you're interested in African American literature, if you're interested in literature in general, it would be a really good kind of book to read, and also it's absolutely tiny. It's so short. Another short book is The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. It's not really a book, it's like a short story. Well, I guess passing is like a novella. I really enjoyed this. I don't think you can go for university and not study The Yellow Wallpaper. I don't think you can be interested in feminist theory at university and not come across references to The Yellow Wallpaper. This book was just really interesting because it looked at how words can actually change things in society. And Charlotte Perkins Gilman did have an effect. She did make change because of this little story. The Yellow Wallpaper is based upon a woman who is suffering from what I think we kind of gather as postnatal depression, or, to be honest, just depression in general. And it looks at how mental health was stigmatised and, is still very stigmatised today. But in particular, the rest cure, which was given to women to basically saying to them, don't do anything because you're very weak right now, you're very hysterical, you're a woman, obviously, you're going to be weak and hysterical at all times. And it was just a really good, I just loved reading it, and it was great to annotate and to study, and there's so much theory around it, there's so much critics talking about it. I love when there are a lot of different critics talking about a book because it makes me excited about it. It's 15 pages long and it will be available free on the internet, so if you get a chance, I would definitely suggest reading The Yellow Wallpaper. The three books that I want to talk about in independent reviews are Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson, 1984 by George Orwell, and Jackie Kay's Trumpet. but I just want to briefly talk about them because I'm very aware that I don't always get around to making the book reviews that I want to. So if I don't get around to doing those videos, I would just like to say that I really, really recommend these 3 books. 1984 was a book that I'd wanted to pick up for a long time, and I'm so glad I finally did. I didn't necessarily enjoy this book. I was kind of like, pretty much all the way through it. I loved the message, I loved the story, I loved annotating it and looking at theory and applying Marxism to it, which is amazing. But I don't know if I actually enjoyed reading it. But I think there was so much in this book that was so worthwhile me reading it, if that makes any sense. I would recommend it to everybody because I just think it's a very, very important book. And it really does affect your way of thinking in life. Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde, I loved this book. I just adored it. I did an essay on this talking about space and setting and how the space and setting in architecture of London is like a metaphor for like the inside of Dr. Jekyll / Mr Hyde's brain. And I applied like lots of Freud and psychology, and I loved it so much. Of all the books that I've studied at university, this is my favourite book. Jackie K's Trumpet is beautiful and incredible. It's about love and grief and everything I think that I'd ever really want a book to be. This is it. And I'm just completely in love with this book and with Jackie K.